All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in to FinOps Fridays. Again, my name is Hunter Willis, and today we have Craig Slack on the line with us from Invero. Craig, tell us a little bit about yourself and Invero and what you do, man.
Thanks very much for having me here, Hunter. Invero, we started in 2016, focused on Microsoft Azure. We're a Microsoft partner. I've been myself personally working with cloud since 2009, a lot of experience in AWS as well as Azure. And I've seen the maturity of cloud in general, and our focus from the beginning, because coming from enterprise, myself and my background, my experience, a lot of our team members have also worked in large enterprises. We take that approach of managing cloud environments, no matter what size you are as an organization, managing it like you're a large enterprise. So in the early days when there was no cost management baked in, no first-party tools, you always have to rely on third parties. We were building our own tools, helping customers digest their cloud spend and so on. So FinOps, as it's called today, is ingrained in our DNA from day one in terms of how to manage and really ultimately run an optimal cloud environment. So our whole tagline is we're helping companies to maximize their cloud spend and the value that they get out of it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's great for sure. And that makes a lot of sense too, because there's so many organizations, especially like I know a lot of your customers are mid-market. I know you do have some enterprise customers that you're helping out with FinOps deployments and managing that cloud, et cetera. The problems for some of those organizations, when we talk about these big organizations that are enterprise organizations, we talk about large scale and all these things. The problems for smaller and medium-sized organizations, it's the same problems, but a lot of times they don't have the resources, the number of people, and the experience to manage the problems. So it doesn't really change that much, and sometimes it's even harder because they don't have the extra resources to be able to deal with it. And so I really was interested to hear your perspective on that today and talk to you about that. And specifically, you and I had this conversation around FinOps maturity and capabilities. We wanted to kind of flesh out some of the things that are going on with changes in the FinOps framework too. But I would love to hear about the challenges from that perspective that your organizations that you work with, the challenges that you all are solving for them, and what you see when it comes to, what they talk about when they say FinOps, when they see cloud cost management, the problems they're having. What's that look like for those organizations?
I think you covered a lot of ground there, that you nailed it on the head, that it's all a scale problem, right? So it's resources that a smaller mid-market size company doesn't necessarily have the ability to go out and hire a dedicated FinOps team. It's people doing FinOps off the side of their desks, or just as expected that they're doing it. But because the scale in terms of the amount of spend that they have in cloud may not be the same as, say, a large enterprise or large government organization that's spending, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars a year in the cloud. Maybe the companies are spending $5-10 million in a year. It's still a significant portion of an overall IT spend. So companies that aren't dedicating some sort of skills or at least skilling up their team to learn about how to build a FinOps practice or mature that FinOps practice. Oftentimes the challenge is that they get the directive from the senior leadership that we need FinOps, and then they have to figure out what is FinOps. Maybe they haven't heard the term before. They go out and figure it out, and they do some Googling, and what do they find? They find tools. Tools will solve the problem, and every IT person loves a shiny object, and they'll go and buy the next best tool that they can find. So that's oftentimes where we find those mid-market companies are gapped. They go out and buy a tool. They spend, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars on tools. Some of them are priced based on a percentage of their spend. But you get this law of diminishing returns when you buy a tool, because you're going to see this huge spike in savings in the early days, and you think, great, we made a great investment in this tool. But eventually those savings will just stop, and you'll brought your overall spend down. But over time, without the proper FinOps practices, that spend will keep going up, because new workloads will be developed, or you want to leverage new capabilities, containerization or AI capabilities, workloads in that space. So without the FinOps practices baked into your overall environment, you're just going to, all those bad habits just keep repeating themselves, and your reliance on a tool to tell you when things are out of whack. Ultimately, you're not going to get that return on investment. And we actually had one customer who was using a tool. I won't mention the name of it for various different reasons, but they actually looked at switching it out because they stopped getting savings out of it. Like they had used it for 3 years, great wins in the first 6 months. They thought they were, off to the races. And then, in year three, they decided to switch to a much cheaper tool that was basically just going to give them a dashboard that they could manage their overall cloud spend. And that's what we're seeing is kind of companies that have made that investment in tools that are now ready to do something more and mature. So leveraging the FinOps Foundation's great work that they've done around maturity and the maturity scale, being able to figure out across the 22 capabilities and domains, where are the areas for opportunity? And it's not just about cost optimization. It's not just about reducing your spend. It's also, I think, the biggest value in overall FinOps practices is attributing value to the organization for all of your cloud spend. So where are the dollars going out the door towards your cloud services? And what are those dollars then in turn driving in terms of return on investment for the business? What additional revenue are you getting out of it? Or what automation to reduce, needing to hire more people or whatever? There has to be some sort of value measurement, and then also attribution, and be able to hold accountable the business groups that are actually driving that spend and asking for new workloads or new spend areas. So long-winded answer to your question there, sorry.
No, it's great. No apology necessary, man. That's fantastic, right? And that's what we're trying to do, is just kind of like dive into the different things that you see. We've talked with different guests on the show about how important it is to have things like processes and documentation alongside anything that's going on with FinOps. We've talked so much of what's in FinOps that's really hard to establish, is like chargeback and showback, exactly like you said, to keep the different parts of the business accountable for the cloud that they're consuming, but also to kind of work towards, and we talk about this, it's almost a buzzword now, but working towards like unit economics of like, hey, how can you develop metrics and utilization from the business units and from the users that are using the cloud applications themselves, and tie that back to delivery, not only to be able to account for profitability, but also the day-to-day, efficiency of different resources based on utilization, right? And then
absolutely,
the other thing is having, the last conversation, the last episode of FinOps Fridays we did, we talked about this idea of organizational change management, right? How do your customers, so when you come in, you're talking with people about, hey, listen, we need to get beyond just kind of this operational practice from an engineering standpoint of kind of, making sure we're doing right sizing and get basic commitments going and that kind of a thing. But what does it look like when you start having those OCM, like, we need to build processes, we need chargeback, showback for these organizations?
Yeah, so I think you touched on a great topic that I associate back to even when DevOps was first becoming a thing.
Yep.
DevOps in general is people, process, and technology, or in tools, right? The same is true for FinOps. It's people and process equally as important as the tools themselves. So kind of building on what I said in the last answer there about, it's not just about going and buying a tool. If you don't have the people and process associated with it that are going to now carry that forward, you are lacking in something. So I think ultimately to answer your question, companies are struggling in that developing those processes that are going to enable them to achieve the best results, or attribute that value through unit economics back to the business. Like, what are the drivers for your business? And they're going to be unique for every individual organization. Sometimes it's, tied straight to revenue. Other times it's, something completely, behind the scenes, but there's a metric there that can be associated with and linked back to some level of cloud spend. And then you tie that into the architecture side of things, and being able to right size and architect solutions that are using the right technologies for the value that it's driving to the business. There's no point in going out there and buying or spinning up a SKU that's the most expensive because you're going to get the highest performant application, if the result of that application is not going to drive enough revenue or cost savings or whatever that are going to offset and have a 1 + 1 = 3 type of a scenario. So I don't know if I fully answered your question there, Hunter, but kind of was
Yeah, well, no, I mean, that's definitely part of the conversation, right? It's like, hey, getting organizations to think about this as process instead of just some specific capability that has to happen, or part of
Hmm.
having a tool that will automate something and solve your problems for you, right? There has to
Yes.
be a mentality and approach where people are incentivized, right, to do this. And again, what you just mentioned, where kind of engineers traditionally are incentivized to provision resources that will have really good performance,
Hmm.
be that uptime or speed, reliability, etc. Like
Absolutely.
the FinOps Foundation, over and over again, you go to data.finops.org. Historically, getting engineers to take action on this stuff
Number one
is,
pain point.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Exactly.
This has been really good, and this kind of gets into some of the changes that are happening with the FinOps framework itself. And I want to talk
Hmm.
to you too about like the capabilities and phases versus maturity model, because that's the
Hmm.
conversation that you and I had prior to recording this video. And I think that it's really important to help people differentiate, especially people that are just now really feeling the pain of cloud costs and diving into the FinOps Foundation and the framework. Like,
Yes.
we know the phases is a little different than maturity versus, and how the maturity model pairs to the capabilities. How do you articulate all of that for the people that you work with?
That's a great question. I think our way to articulate it is dependent on where the company is at in their journey, number one, because there are some companies that you still have to educate on why FinOps is important, or even what is FinOps, right? So, um, but in the most cases where the maturity level is very low, kind of on the wall crawl side of the scale in terms of FinOps Foundations, crawl, walk, run. Um, we'll have a conversation around their tooling. Maybe they've got their tools, they've got maybe some Power BI dashboards or something that they've built in house, and they just want more, or they believe that there's more they can do. So the recent additions that came out from the FinOps Foundation with their 2025 update for the FinOps framework, I think are very interesting around identifying and recognizing that there's not just one level of maturity across the entire organization. You don't need to be at a crawl across all areas. You may, and they're bringing in also the idea of scopes. So having different scopes. So it could be, your public cloud, your hyperscaler scope is one level of maturity across the 22 capability areas. But maybe on your SaaS or your on-prem data center is another scope that they define, has different personas, different requirements in terms of what is needed to manage the overall spend in that space. So I think the addition of scopes is number one, is a benefit for everybody, because you can then have these different approaches for the different areas that you're looking at. I think a lot of this was born in really the hyperscaler side of things, and then it's evolved into, like, from moving away from just the infrastructure to also adopt SaaS, and then AI. FinOps for AI is a big thing too. But then being able to split it out by scope and say, okay, we're okay to be at a crawl stage for, call it AI, and then, but we want to be at it for our hyperscaler. We want to be between a walk and a run. We want to be slightly more mature there. So you can have different roadmaps, different paths that you're going along to mature your people, your processes, and your tools for those by each scope area. And it could be based off the impact to the organization as well. If there's not a huge impact for on-prem data centers because you're declining the investments there, maybe that can be at a low maturity level because it's eventually going to roll off. But you're investing heavily in, say, AI, you want to work more heavily on maturing that area. So in terms of how we help customers, though, it's helping to identify where they're at today, and as an organization where they think they want to get to. And we have not seen an organization that across the board, across all 22 capability areas in the framework, they say we want to be at run. Very often it's kind of a mix between walk and then maybe halfway to run, but we measure where they are today so that we can, that's the baseline. And then we can then identify specific actionable recommendations on how to close the gap to where they want to get to. And it's not an overnight thing. It's a journey. So and you're smiling because you know it as well, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's so many of these things. When you look at the different capabilities and the definitions for maturity at the capability level, it's like it's squishy, because and some of them have more than others. Like if you go to look, this is a really great comparison, but if you look at like the maturity level description for allocation, that is some detailed documentation right there, because
Yes.
allocation is hugely important. And when we say the word allocation, we kind of all know what we're talking about, but that entails an enormous amount of work, and it's referencing a lot of stuff that's going on with an organization to truly know where the cost drivers are for each application and how that should be distributed, and then also the processes around it making that happen and which players are involved. So like, but then you have other capabilities where there's only a few bullets for what the crawl, walk, run looks like for them. But I think one of the biggest things to emphasize is we look at the FinOps X presentation last year that J.R. Stormont did was really great, kind of diving in. This is squishy, and priorities can change. Some organization, like a really great example of this is like sustainability metrics, right? Carbon consumption metrics.
Oh, yes.
Before the past couple of years, that wasn't really a priority for anybody. And then it was like, oh, hey, we have to add this as a capability. And then everybody, of course, is going to start at the crawl phase, except for maybe there were a few organizations already doing that, and they're kind of in the walk or run phase. But then when we're breaking this down as a conversation, we also do, when we're working with our customers, like an assessment, right? So I try to help them figure out where they are. But we also, to your point, in the way that you articulated this a little differently, but we help them prioritize the capabilities. Because, again, there's going to be some things that are really important for some organizations, and other organizations that are like, we don't care about any of the rest of this stuff. We want to get to the run maturity level with allocation before we even touch anything else. But some organizations may be more ahead in some areas or have really solid portions of those descriptions marked down. And then like what we find too is that some companies may be like, hey, we've already covered the majority of what we want for the allocation capability. We're going to mark ourselves as being in the run phase for that, even though it doesn't really align with the framework per se, right? Because we don't need to do the rest of this stuff. And so it gets squishy, very subjective. But I think that the big takeaway, which you're on the same page with as well, is that like the capabilities are where that maturity level lives. It's, we've got the phases of inform, optimize, and operate.
Yes. But
that doesn't directly correlate with every single one of the capabilities nor the maturity level, right?
Correct. Yeah, and that life cycle is repeating. It's self-reinforcing, right? So you're going to go, optimize to back into inform and operate and so on. So it's like it's not. I don't think you're ever done. Like you have to define what done is, and by the time you get there, done is going to look different. It's like, okay, we have all these other things we can now do. And of course, the cloud is ever evolving too. So there's going to be changes to not just like a FinOps framework. There's going to be changes to how people look at operating the cloud. New tooling will come out, or just there will be new workloads. Like go back 2-3 years ago, nobody was talking about AI workloads in the cloud, but now look at where we are. And now we have to figure out all these net new processes around how to manage the costs there, also how to govern it, how to make sure that it's not going out of control. So it's just ever evolving. So I don't think there will ever be just draw a line in the sand. Once we get there, we're done. I think it's an ever evolving, and I love that the process there that the FinOps Foundation says. It's a continual self-reinforcing.
They use the word flywheel, right? And it even accelerates because it's part of your process now, so it goes faster and faster as time goes on.
100%.
All right, Craig. Well, any last words? Thanks again so much for joining us today and having this conversation. And do you have any last words or any pieces of advice for the folks out there that are listening?
I think the key thing is don't get discouraged, and move beyond just the cost optimization and cost management side of things. That's a great place to start, but there's so much more that can be done. But don't get overwhelmed by trying to do it all at once. So pick off what are the top 10 things that will move the needle in the next 6-12 months, then pick another top 10 things and just keep working at it. So it can be daunting, but if you do it, in bite-sized chunks, as they say, how do you eat an elephant? Just one bite at a time. So there you go. That's my piece of advice.
No, that's really great. That prioritization too, like as part of that conversation, when you're looking at the capabilities, know what's important to your teams, and lean into that as well, because that's what we talked about here today. So this is a really great conversation, Craig. Thanks so much again for your time, and we'll see everybody next time. Thank you.
Thanks again, Hunter, for having me. Thank you very much.